Will, are there people waiting to get in at this point, or are we pretty much
There are a few people who are still signing up.
okay?
So you should probably give them another minute or so.
Sure,
To
we will do that.
You know what? I think we could probably begin.
Let's do it. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gail Barron, and I'm the co-chair of the Women and Families Committee of CB8. We're really delighted to have all of you join us for a very important discussion. This evening's meeting is going to center around the urgent and acute need for quality, affordable, and accessible childcare in our district. We have some outstanding speakers. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Peggy Price, who's the co-chair of the committee, who's going to introduce our speakers. Peggy?
Thank you very much, Gail. So good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This evening, we have an excellent panel of speakers who will address a critical need in our community for childcare, and especially care for the youngest children. Childcare accessibility and affordability was already a problem nationally and in New York City before the coronavirus struck, closing care facilities and schools, forcing many parents to choose between going to work or staying home to care for their kids who were now at home. All the while, already high costs of childcare soared. The problem has become so untenable that it must now be addressed, which our speakers will do. First, we will hear from them, and then we will take your questions. In the interest of time, please keep your questions right to the point. Our first speaker, Allison Silkowski, is Assistant Director in the New York City Controller's Office, and she is the author of an excellent 2019 report on childcare called New York City Under 3, a plan to make childcare affordable for New York City families. She will update us on the worsening state of childcare in New York City and present Controller Stringer's legislative proposal to make childcare more accessible and affordable to parents. After Allison, we will hear from Shania John, who's Director of Training in the Bureau of Child Care with the New York City Health Department, and Jessica Mates, who is Chief of Staff to Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. So if we can, let's just get right started. And is Allison here?
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Allison. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is Allison Silkowski of the New York City Controller's Office. So why don't you just begin, Allison, if you don't mind, and tell us about the state of affairs and the legislative proposal and what you think that we should do.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak with all of you. It's also nice to see that at least one baby is joining. I actually have a almost 5-month-old here, so I have a new appreciation for how important this issue is. And because Peggy outlined the magnitude of the crisis that we're facing so well, I'll try to keep my remarks on sort of our 2019 analysis of the situation a bit brief and focus more on our proposal. But I did just want to sort of share some of our thinking and our motivation back in 2019 when we first released this report. And we did embark on the project beginning in 2017, having heard from New Yorkers for many years about how difficult it is to find care in the city, having to deplete savings, quit their jobs just to afford it. And of course, seeing this up very close and personal as the parent of 2 young boys, the controller felt really strongly that there had to be a solution for the crisis in care, and really that the economic security of families and the economic health of the city depended on it. So we took a look at the current landscape, at the time, and it's still the case that UPK has saved families thousands of dollars. It's really been instrumental in helping young children prepare for kindergarten, and it assists families across income levels, but the city has done much less to support families with infants and toddlers. Only about 23,000 or so children under 3 are in subsidized care now. And I actually just looked at the latest data that's available, and enrollment has gone down, and even more so in the wake of the pandemic over the last 10 months. At the time we released the report, that 23,000 represented about 7% of children under 3 in the city. So we're only reaching a fraction of the infants and toddlers in the city. And there's no assistance available at all for moderate income families. So really at the moment, you're only getting help if you're in the lowest income bracket. So looking at all that data and the research on early childhood development, we felt like we were missing a really important opportunity. The time when children's brains are most flexible and in need of nurturing and most dynamic is exactly when childcare is the most expensive and parents are typically earning the least amount that they will in their career. And it's also when government assistance is most scarce. So it's this perfect storm, really, or imperfect storm, I should say. So to build the case for more public investment, we looked at 3 pillars of a high quality system. That's affordability, accessibility, and quality. I won't spend too much time on these because I'm sure we understand, especially the families who are joining, or the parents who are joining, how expensive care is. So in our report, we assessed affordability, and to no one's surprise in the office, we found that care, especially for infants, is incredibly expensive. It's now over $21,000 on average for a slot in a child care center, which of course outstrips rent and incomes for many families. On accessibility, what we did was we compared the state OCFS and city DOHMH data on childcare capacity to live births in the city. Doing so, we estimate that there are slots for only 22%, or about 1 in 5 children under 2 in the city. In the Upper East Side, we estimate that there are slots for only 1 in 10 children under 2. And as I mentioned before, we know that enrollment has decreased, and so has capacity, to the extent that providers have had to shut their doors under the financial pressures that they're facing right now with COVID. No, not all families with young children, of course, will utilize formal care, regardless of cost and access. So we're not looking for a ratio of 100%. And to try to pinpoint neighborhoods that had a real dearth of services, what we sought to do was identify childcare deserts, and using a definition of any neighborhood with a ratio of provider capacity to births of less than 20%. We found that 25 neighborhoods, about half in the city, are infant care deserts. And of course, with the Upper East Side at 10% capacity, we would consider that an infant care desert as well. And on the quality issue, the last pillar, we primarily focused on the economic security of providers, because we know that compensation and support for providers is so tied to quality. So using 2017 census data, we found that 1 in 4 employed childcare workers in the city live in poverty, and more than half have income below 200% of poverty, which would make them eligible for the very subsidized childcare that they provide themselves. So given that all of that landscape and the fact that we know that infant care is exceptionally labor intensive because of the small ratios that are required and appropriately mandated by the city and the state, we knew a significant investment was going to be needed to really build out a quality infant and toddler system in the city. Our proposal, which we named NYC Under 3, has 3 core goals. So the first is to lessen the financial burden of care for parents and the workforce, the care workforce, to reach more families, including moderate income families, by increasing capacity and also eligibility for assistance. And then finally, to support access to higher quality settings. So on affordability, our proposal would lower family contributions towards subsidized care and increase eligibility. So this is an important point, from 200% of poverty to 400% of poverty, which is about $100,000 for a family of 4. And we're proposing that there be a graduated fee scale. So families below the poverty line would pay nothing, and fees would rise to a maximum of 12% of family income for families at the income cap. When the benefits fully phased in, we're estimating that this would triple the number of infants and toddlers in publicly funded care. That would get us to about 84,000, and that would include some 34,000 families who are not currently utilizing any paid care. Out-of-pocket costs would decrease for families significantly under the plan. So a family of 4 with income at the current cap in the city pays about 17% of family income, or nearly $9,000 toward care now. And that's if they can access a subsidy. We know that there's a wait list. So even if you can, if you're lucky enough to get a voucher or get a slot in one of the city's contracted programs, that's what you're looking to still pay in terms of the parent tuition. Under our proposal, we would essentially have what they would pay. So it would be around a maximum of $4,000 a year. I do want to emphasize that while we're targeting the largest benefit to families with the most need, we understand and appreciate that the majority of families in the city struggle to afford care. And that's why we're so committed to expanding the universe of families who would qualify. And we're also very hopeful and optimistic that the incoming federal administration will significantly increase funding for childcare. And that would help put us on a path to increase eligibility even more and really realize at some point universal access. And now, to ensure families that want care actually have access to the provider of their choice, we would also direct investments to build the infrastructure needed to support capacity. So NYC Under 3, we're proposing dedicating $100 million in year 1 of implementation for startup and expansion grants for providers. We would also dedicate capital funds. So we're calling for the city to borrow $100 million in debt service in each of the first 5 years of implementation. And we would target city-owned sites for development of centers first. Now, on quality, we really strongly believe that we can't be asking more of childcare providers, and this is even more important now, without addressing compensation. So our proposal calls for $50 million to be invested in year 1 to increase the reimbursement rates that we provide to providers in the system. At a minimum, we think reimbursement rates should cover the cost of meeting mandated licensing requirements. But childcare providers also deserve living wages, and that should be the floor in terms of setting reimbursement rates. We also, you'll see at the end of the report in our implementation plan, we also propose setting aside a fund to support provider access to training, professional development, and education scholarships, which is all part of the process of quality improvement. So I'm sure I probably have to wrap up quickly. What would all this cost? So that's the vision, but what would it all cost? We are proposing a 6-year implementation plan. We really think, I mean, this was back in 2019, and the situation has only worsened. So it's possible it would take even longer to build up the capacity. maybe less so if we had more funding, but as of 2019, when we released the report, spending in year one would be about $180 million with no expansion that year. And most of the funds dedicated to the grants to providers, the capital debt service, and the fund for training. So really to set a good floor for expansion. And then as the supply of licensed care grew, we would make assistance available to more families. And a smaller portion of the annual funding would go toward capacity building. And when fully implemented and assistance is available to the whole universe of families we propose serving, the annual cost would be roughly $660 million. But we know that there would be enormous benefits. And in the report, we estimate that the program would increase employment of parents, and we know this would be overwhelmingly mothers, by roughly 10 percentage points. It's about 20,000 people, and those 20,000 mothers would contribute approximately $540 million in earnings to our economy annually. And we know the benefits would also accrue to employers through a more stable workforce, lower absenteeism, higher retention. Research on lowering the cost of childcare has shown this over and over again in other countries, in Canada, for example, but also in studies of pre-K expansion. So we know the benefits would accrue to businesses. And for that reason, we've proposed funding NYC under 3 with a modest payroll tax paid for by employers. So we would impose the tax on just the top 5% of private firms in the city based on payroll size, exempting the vast majority of small businesses. It would be graduated and it would kick in at a higher threshold than the current MTA payroll tax, which was implemented back in 2009 and sort of served as a model for us when we were developing the payroll tax. The average cost per employee for businesses with payrolls equal or greater to than $2.5 million would be about $2 a week. We think that's a fair investment. And we believe the payroll tax would generate over $600 million. So it would get us nearly all the way there in terms of paying for the program when it's fully built out. We did identify sponsors in the state Senate and the Assembly who introduced bills that would establish the payroll tax. The bills were introduced back in 2019, but we do expect that they'll be reintroduced this legislative session. I know that the Senate version has been reintroduced, but just hasn't been given a bill number yet because so many bills are being introduced with the start of the year, but happy to pass the bill numbers along too if folks are interested when that's reintroduced. So I apologize if I talked a bit quickly, but I wanted to get through most of the ground that we covered in the report. I'm happy, of course, to answer questions, and but I do want to make sure to add, because I know this is something that the controller is always emphasizing too when he's been around the city meeting with stakeholders on this, is that NYC under 3 is really a proposal. It's not a prescription. And we certainly, in our office don't pretend to have all of the answers on this, but we do believe unequivocally that significant new resources are needed, particularly for infants and toddlers, that it's perhaps the smartest investment that government can be making right now. And certainly given the unprecedented challenges the city is facing, the decreased revenues for providers, all of the challenges that families are facing right now, really our economy and our recovery as we enter month 11 of this pandemic really depends on it. So we are very much committed to the proposal and are so grateful for the opportunity to share the details with you.
Well, thank you very much. And we will have questions if you can stick around after all 3 speakers finish. But For now, we'd like to hear from Shania John, who is Training Director at the Health Department's Bureau of Child Care, who will tell us a bit about requirements for quality care or how the health department assesses child care in our city. So Shania?
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. I am the Director of Training and Communications for the Bureau of Child Care, which is the regulatory body for child care programs in New York City. So just a little bit about my background. After running a really large child care program downtown Brooklyn, I spent a little over the first decade of my tenure with the Bureau of Child Care as an early childhood education consultant, which included conducting childcare inspections for permitted and preliminary childcare programs, processing childcare permits, providing regulatory guidance and technical assistance to programs, and enforcement. So I'd like to provide you with some information regarding the available childcare programs in your area. Peggy was kind enough to provide me with all of the zip codes, so we took a look at the programs that reported to us that they were active as of last week, Friday. So currently there are 96 active programs in Community Board 8 Manhattan, which include center-based programs, which are regulated by Article 47 of the New York City Health Code. And those are childcare programs that are not associated with an elementary, middle, or high school program. And again, they follow the provisions of Article 47 of the New York City Health Code. That also includes school-based or Article 43 regulated programs. And these are programs that are affiliated with a public, non-public, chartered, or other school that's recognized under state ed. And they provide instruction to children ages 3 through 5 and grades 1 through 12. And the Article 43 programs are generally associated with your private schools that, again, go from K to 12, and they also have a preschool program. So currently there are 96 active programs in total. Of that 96 programs, there are 17 infant and toddler programs. And infant toddler programs are for children from birth to 2 years old. And you'll notice there are a lot less infant toddler programs throughout the city. Obviously, the cost of opening an infant toddler program exceeds the cost of a preschool because they are required to have a sprinkler system and other measures in place. There are also limits to where an infant toddler program can be placed in a building. Second. There are also state regulated programs in your zip codes. There are 14 state regulated programs, and those are home-based, family daycare, group family daycare programs that are based in the home. And their regulations come from the state, although the city is the regulatory body as well for those programs. And so we have two types of inspections that we conduct. We have our public health sanitarian inspection, and those inspections check for the physical facility, the floors, the walls, the ceilings, and they make sure that the facility is physically safe, the structure, the heat, the water, and all of those components. The other side of our inspections are the early childhood education consultant inspections, which look at quality. We look at staff qualifications, health, screening that is compatible with the law. We look at daily schedules, we look at meals, and we also look at the classroom environment. And so every year, each program has 2 inspections at least, one from the public health sanitarian, one from the early childhood education consultant. They conduct their inspection, they leave a report, and those reports can be found online. So we have some great search tools for parents who are looking for care. For Article 43 and Article 47 programs, DOHMH has a great website, and it's called Child Care Connect. And you can look for programs through their legal name, through their permit, through your zip code. You can put in your zip code and find the whole host of programs, the permit number if you know it. And you can also see if a program offers infant toddler care, preschool, or if it's center-based. You can view inspection reports. You can look at if the program is free or low cost. You can see if it's city funded, if the program has a contract with the DOE for early learn, UPK, or 3K, or also Head Start. The most important part of this is that every program in Child Care Connect is a licensed and permitted program. So you know that it is licensed or permitted by DOHMH, and that these programs have had inspections. You can also search to see if a program is certified to administer medication, which is important to parents who have children with medical needs. For state programs, of which there are 14, the state has a website, and the links to each of the search engines are in the chat. So you can take a look in the chat and use these engines in order to search for childcare. And again, for the state program, you can search again for free or low cost programs for eligible families, whether they're city funded, and also if they administer medication. Thirdly, there is another set of programs that came about due to the pandemic, and they are called Learning Bridges. And those are offered through the New York City Department of Education. It's a new program, and it provides free childcare options for children from 3K, which are 3-year-olds, through 8th grade on days when they would be scheduled for remote learning. And parents can apply to have their child placed in a 3K program, in an early bridge program. And again, the link to search and apply will be in the chat. So we know that programs and families have been impacted by COVID-19. You might see that some of the programs in your neighborhood, those that you are familiar with, have reduced capacities, have chosen to offer some program outdoors, and have taken a lot of measures to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19. Unfortunately, you'll also see that some programs have closed their doors, either because they were not able to obtain the enrollment, or that the measures were, just too hard for them and for it to be profitable. Back in June, after childcare programs were ordered closed, New York State issued some guidelines that all programs were required to adhere to prior to reopening. And those guidelines included affirming that they would comply with the state's mitigation measures, creating a business safety plan that includes those measures, and they had to follow a series of program-specific protocols, like a reduction of group sizes to 15, additional cleaning and sanitizing protocols, physical distancing protocols, mandatory face coverings for all staff and children over 2 when they leave the premises, limiting the visitors that come in, maintaining stagnant groups, and limiting shared supplies, objects, and materials, making hand washing and sanitization stations available throughout the childcare program. So those are some of the things that childcare centers have had to put in place. And again, you may see you'll see a reduction in capacity for some programs because they did have to reduce their classrooms to 15. And for children under 3, the ratios are less. The ratios follow Article 47 of the Health Code. And that is it. I'll stick around for questions if you have any once we are done.
Thank you so much, Shania. And finally, we'd like to hear from Jessica Mates, who is Manhattan Borough President's Gail Brewer's Chief of Staff. Hi, welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you to Community Board 8 for hosting this forum. It's terrific. Thank you to the Controller's Office, which did a really just amazingly great report, and to, of course, the Department of Health, which always is terrific about keeping our programs safe. I came to this from sort of a less academic angle. I was a single mom and relied on a lot of city services during this pandemic. I was taking care of my granddaughter, and I got to see, firsthand how that, work, not having daycare balance works. So I came through that. but of course in our office, we're involved in a lot of different issues. People know Gail Brewer as the borough president, we get involved in a lot of things. And we had even, during the pandemic held one of our town hall, virtual town halls with Columbia University on childcare and on sort of reopening and, what are some of the strategies that folks were using. So we were kind of, looking at the issue. Then in the fall, we started hearing from providers. And what we found out was that the birth to 5 early Head Start RFP that had been issued, the results had come in and Manhattan had lost a lot of slots. And, this is real concerning to us, obviously. What we discovered was that Manhattan, and some people argue a little bit with the number slightly, but we believe that Manhattan lost 511 slots overall, about a 44% decrease, and that Manhattan lost, or will lose, because this is supposed to start July 1st, will lose 783 extended day slots. And again, coming to this from just a very, practical angle, if you don't have extended day, that's really hard for a working parent. So we're real concerned about this. And, we started contacting folks at the Department of Education that's issued this RFP and trying to find out what's going on. We were told, a lot of different things and none of them were great answers, I have to say. So, one thing we were told is that there was some shifting of slots to, other high need areas. We certainly would never argue against moving slots to high need areas, but I think we would say, echo what the controller said, which is that this is an area where you add more money. You don't cut one place and add another place. If there's a need for more, you add more, because this is what enables people to work. I mean, you can't work if you have no place to keep your kids. So we said, a few things in answering, sort of why the city had made these changes. One is that, even in our wealthiest, zip codes, there are pockets of poverty and there are pockets of folks who are lower income throughout the city, regardless of what their zip code is. And we need to provide services for those people and as well as for everyone else. That, in Manhattan, what happens very often is that Manhattan sites are places where people who live in other boroughs bring their children because they want to have them near where they work. So for a lot of our providers, they're providing childcare to people who might live in other boroughs, but need, they need to have their children nearby where their job is. We also know that, we want seamless services. And that was, in fact, supposed to be one of the goals of the RFP, was that there be seamless services. So when we saw things taken out, some 3K services, extended day, suddenly we have a mishmash and a very choppy system. And we also know, as the controller points out, that, there is a overwhelming need for, in moderate income households, for childcare. One of the things that the city said was that, there's additional Head Start slots in Manhattan. And, that may or may not be true. We can argue it, but Head Start is primarily for households that earn no more than $26,000 for a family of 4. Whereas the Early Learn programs, which got cut in Manhattan, are for households earning up to $57,000 for a family of 4. So, that's a big difference. We took a lot of issue to this. We got together with our colleagues in government and did a letter to the mayor about it and really tried to argue that first, we have longstanding providers who are known in our communities, who have very successful programs, who provide comprehensive services, frequently for whole families. They're places that have worked with families for years. They provide culturally and linguistically appropriate services. They work with children with special needs, and that these are providers that we shouldn't just cut their slots, willy-nilly because we want to put slots somewhere else. That we said that, there certainly are working families that need extended childcare. They're just, not having extended care, which is, beyond the school day, just doesn't work for most working parents. I mean, then you're having choppy services. You're having to bring your kid one place and find someone else to pick them up somewhere else. And again, it's something that, many of us experienced when we were raising kids. And then, it's certainly a loss of jobs. We calculated that about over 100 jobs would be lost from these cuts in Manhattan. And that certainly, you know, the loss of 3K slots, which we lost a lot of 3K slots, would really disrupt the, you know, sort of seamless services that are ideally the best for families and for kids. So, you know, that's sort of where we are. We are continuing to fight this and to say we need to restore these slots for Manhattan. And again, it's not to take away from other places, other neighborhoods and other boroughs. There simply needs to be more money added because we can't lose these slots, and we need, you know, the pandemic's, we hope, going to come to an end, and people need to get back to work, and they're going to need childcare in order to do that. So, you know, that's where we are now. We're working on this Birth to 5 Early Head Start RFP and hoping to restore slots in Manhattan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, all 3 speakers. And now we're going to proceed to Q&A, and Gail will take over.
Okay. Are there any questions? You can rate. Will, did you tell people to raise their hands using?
I have not yet. If you notice, you're all muted. The way that you'll be recognized is through the use of the raise hand feature. Don't just wave your hand on the camera. It's hard to find you. So if you have recently updated your Zoom account, if you look for the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, you will be able to click that and see the raise hand button. Don't click the little waving hand button. That'll disappear after a few seconds, but click the button that says raise hand. And if you're on an older version of Zoom, open the participants menu at the bottom of your screen, click the word participants, and a box will pop open, and you can find the raise hand button in that box. And if you're on the phone, it's *9.
Okay. Are there, I see the first question from Tricia Shimamura. Tricia?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Peggy and Gail, for putting this together. I honestly, and I know that I sound like a broken record at this point because I bring this up so many times, but I'm so grateful that we're talking about this. I really, frankly, can't think of a more important conversation that we should be having right now. We just saw the numbers recently saying that so many hundreds of thousands of people were out of work, and that they were unilaterally all women. And I really and truly, in my heart of hearts, know that it's because we have lack of childcare options. And to hear it from Allison, particularly saying that just our sheer numbers are just not meeting the demand here, it's something that it's a reality that we live with, but it's also just very, I really appreciate the work you did. Allison, I've read that NYC Under 3 report probably 20 times, and I'm so grateful for it. I know that I used to work as a staffer, and I know sometimes you don't think maybe only certain people read it, but I read it and I loved it. And I have actually a couple of questions for you about that specifically, and we'll then let other people have a chance. So one question I had was that I think that one piece to this is that I found it to be so shocking that early childcare providers are paid significantly less than pre-K teachers. And that differential can be up to 20% of a difference between the two. And I just think it's so, of course, and then I think, well, of course we don't have any early childhood childcare options here because it costs more and they're not paid as well. And so I wonder if you can just speak a little bit more. I'm like, how do you raise wages for an entire industry? And how do you achieve pay parity for an entire industry of people is my real question with that, because I think it's so important. And when we fight for more childcare seats, yes, but we have to fight for, like you said, a livable wage, and it's just not there. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, and Trisha, I'm so glad that you're raising that issue because I think the care crisis that we're experiencing is already underreported and underappreciated, but I think the challenges that providers face are especially so. And I think it also prevents us from developing any sort of allyship or solidarity between parents who are struggling and providers. I mean, think if we sort of brought the two together to advocate for more funding. I mean, everyone's sort of getting a raw deal in this except for government, which has just largely ignored the crisis. But in any case, this was actually perhaps the most challenging piece of developing the proposal. One, because I think people understand that care is so expensive, and want to bring costs down for families, which is certainly a piece of the proposal. But we can't do that without adequately reimbursing providers. The way that we are sort of driving the investments to providers is by increasing reimbursement rates. So in the case of NYC under 3, what the city pays directly to providers, it needs to be far, far higher and reflect the true cost of providing quality care. Right now, we're essentially reimbursing providers for what they're able to charge, which we know, just given the financial pressures for families, is nowhere near what they need to support quality. And it means that providers, especially family daycare providers who are really meeting the need more than centers for infants and toddlers, is, they're dipping into their own pockets and their savings to be able to provide supplies and keep things going. The family daycares were not shut down by the state during the pandemic, so they've been trying to hold on and meet the needs in their communities during this time. And we felt really strongly that in addition to increasing compensation through the reimbursement rates and sort of restructuring how we're the methodology for determining the rates themselves, that we need to be investing in education, in training, and to the extent that providers are able to access additional training, especially family daycare providers, many of whom don't have an associate's or a bachelor's degree, to the extent that they do attain credentials in early childhood education, we need to be compensating for that, them for that too, right? So with every increase in a credential, a certificate, we also need to be increasing the reimbursement rate on the back end. That's a really important piece because we just, in this moment, we can't ask them to do more without addressing their needs.
Thank you so much. I will just ask my second question and I'll be done for now. But my second question, I guess, was just a notice, and I know I see Natalie Cronin, who's here, and I think that she runs a daycare center. So I will say that one piece that I wish that we had more of was the perspective of the providers, particularly through the pandemic. I've heard a range of experiences of how it's been, if they've gotten the correct guidance, I would love to know what their needs are, because I would hate to see any more daycares close. As we fight for more seats, I would love to make sure that the ones that we have are getting the support that they need to the best of their ability. And then the other piece is that I just want to say that I think that there's just such a big intersection. This topic is so important because it is not a women and children's issue singularly, right? It's an economic issue. It is much broader than that. It's an MWBE issue because so many childcare providers are minority and women-owned businesses. It's a vacant storefront issue. So it's such a critical one. And I would just, my comment, Allison, is just that I wish that that there could be more of an argument of all of those intersections. I didn't remember seeing in the report any sort of discussion of using our vacant storefronts and using this time we have so much empty real estate that to really capitalize on that and increase our seats, or increase the seats this way. And I wish that there was a little bit more of a discussion in general, not just your report, which is excellent. And again, I have like multiple copies in my house, but if we could just talk a lot about how when we increase childcare, we also increase opportunities for not just women to return to work, but these are primarily women-owned businesses. So we're investing in women that way too. And that's it for now.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, because you mentioned capacity, that there's very little data on sort of the current state of affairs in the city and in terms of how many providers we've potentially lost, but some early data that the state OCFS collected in the summer suggested that some, 36% of providers had closed their doors. That's statewide. So, that's why I sort of present NYC under 3 to you with this very large caveat, obviously of COVID, and we know that childcare providers really did not do well with the first round of PPP loans. There are a lot of administrative challenges, and Natalie, if you are a provider yourself, I'm sure you could probably speak to that far better than me, but the lack of financial assistance is really crippling the sector. So if we don't see some public investment soon, I fear that the labor force participation rates, as you said, particularly for women, are just going to continue to fall.
Thank you, Allison. Natalie, we'd like to hear from you.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
putting this together. I've been a home-based childcare provider at 82nd in York this will be my 10th year in March. It is a labor of love because it is not a labor that is lucrative, as you guys can probably understand. And a lot of the stresses that I face as a home provider, and I'm really happy to hear that home-based programs are coming into this conversation. And I'm sad to hear that there's only 14 of us in this whole district. And I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult is that landlords are not always kind to us and a little intimidating. They've changed the licensing requirements since 2014. People used to be able to hold more than one license. Now it's one license per person or entity. So that has reduced opportunity for expansion. So if you're like me and I have a waiting list all the time, you just gotta have a waiting list. There's nowhere to grow. I think homes and including homes in this conversation is a really wonderful way to increase availability for infants and toddlers. The ratio for infants and toddlers in a home-based program is 1 to 2, and we can look after 3 older ones. But in general, if you have a program with 6 babies, you need to have at least 4 teachers. So our ratios are really lower. We give children a lot more snuggly attention, so there's we don't have the overhead of the building whenever, when you're talking about subsidies, for example. That was always what I heard of, because I don't accept subsidies because they're so small. Like if I were taking care of 5 children myself, I would be barely making minimum wage, no overtime, and the daycare opens at 7:30 and closes at 6. So it's really not in a provider's best interest to try to work within subsidies because they're so small. And unless you're asking parents to kick in, and not every family can do that. So we do our best. I have a sliding scale. I've been working with families who've had needs all through my opening. And I just really, really feel that if we were to expand upon the availability of home-based programs, it would serve a lot more working families with respect to infants and toddlers, with pre-K and after school. And I think the landlords were a little more friendly, and there was specific protections in place for providers like me. Some landlords have already learned their lesson. They've tried to say that an illegal business was operating in their building, and they've been met with decisions that have always favored the provider. But it doesn't stop people or landlords, like it has happened to me, from being literally intimidated out of a lease. So yeah, that's Glenwood. They got their big, bad, scary attorney. And it was a really hard recovery. It was, a huge expense for someone like me. So, to have protections in place and to also just let landlords understand that there isn't dramatic risk for having home-based programs in your building. Most buildings, I know mine does at this point, maybe not in the beginning, they're happy to have me there. People actually move into the building because we're there. And I can prove that. So I think, including home programs in the conversation is really important. And the regulatory process, and I was happy to see someone from the DOH here to discuss, the the paperwork process, it's very archaic. It's literally snail mail and faxes and going back and forth. It takes a really long time just to get your paperwork through, to hire new staff and to do your licensing paperwork. In the pandemic, things moved even slower. So it is a really, it's a challenge for providers when things don't go more expeditiously with respect to paperwork. So that's all that I've been dealing with. So I'm happy to see home providers included in the conversation. And yes, I think for infants and for special needs children, the intimate nature just of having a home-based program can't be beat. It really can't. I love my program. People love my program. And like I said, I wouldn't do it if I didn't absolutely love it. And I would love to see other people do it. I know there's other people like me that would be interested in doing it, but it's so scary a risk.
Well, we're fortunate to have you in our district. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you for having me.
I believe that Lindsay has some questions.
Thanks. Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So first, this is such a great love affair for me. I had a daughter who was with Natalie, and I didn't realize she was going to be on this call, but she's absolutely right that people are thrilled with her care. And hearing her talk about the challenges, it actually overlaps with something that I was going to bring up, which is I know that home care has a hard time having 2 locations. So when I was with Natalie, they ended up opening a second location. And then I believe it was a landlord issue. She could correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe it was this licensing issue where then we had to go back down to 1. And that's, fine for me as a person who's already in, but it means that her ability to offer care for multiple people is much harder or impossible. And it's something where I understand the impetus under this thing, which is you think a home care is just one home. But having Natalie being able to have multiple sites means that you have someone with the institutional knowledge and know-how of like how to do the hiring, how to do the staffing, how to meet the needs of children. And so I think if that were something that could be revisited, that would be something that would be an easy fix with some sort of oversight. That means, you don't have one person having 100 home daycares, but something that allows them to have more than just one seems like an okay change by me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Peter Patch.
First of all, thanks to all of you and Gail and Peggy for this presentation. I thought it was fabulous. Allison, terrific. Shania, thank you. Jessica, supporting Gail Brewer, who I consider the local version of Mother Teresa. She is too wonderful. Having said all that, I guess my number one concern is how we can support or provide impetus towards having more support, more availability, more funding. And part of that, I suppose, might be whether there's some kind of a resolution, Gail, you and Peggy would like us to put together, which I would absolutely support. I mean, and I also think I've been paying a lot of attention to our controller, and I think his support for early childhood programs and childcare is fabulous. Allison, I almost don't want to ask the question, but I'm concerned about the finances, and I know that the controller knows the finances of the city like nobody else, and we're facing, I think, probably several years of very difficult finances in the city. If you want to make a brief comment about that, fine. If you want to duck the question, I'm okay with that too.
Look, we presented the proposal, including the payroll tax, to the governor's task force on childcare affordability back, I guess it was last summer. And it was a tough sell at that time, right? And we are facing enormous demands on our safety net system as it is. I think the priority, as Jessica explained so well, is really preserving the slots that we have. And I think the controller would say to you that, like, look, there are savings to be found in our $90 billion city budget that should certainly be prioritized for preserving what capacity we have. We certainly plan to continue to advocate for the payroll tax. The MTA payroll tax was, I mean, we're 11 years into that payroll tax and the sky didn't fall. That was passed sort of in the wake of the Great Recession. So I think there is an opening for us, but certainly we could do a mix of savings in the existing budget and the payroll tax, even if we had to lower the thresholds. But we're willing to sort of negotiate all that. I think we felt really strongly that we couldn't put forward a bold plan for creating a path to universal care without identifying a funding mechanism, because too often, and you see this in localities all across the country, they have a great legislative proposal. This happened in DC. They passed essentially a universal childcare bill, but no fund, they didn't appropriate any funds. So it's just been sitting there as a good idea that the local council members enacted. So we do feel strongly that we need to push for a funding mechanism. And I would, and if I could, I would also suggest, to the extent people feel that this is an important issue, that we should really be lobbying the incoming Biden-Harris administration, who, during the campaign, Biden endorsed the Federal Child Care for Working Families Act, which is modeled very, I should say, it came before NYC Under 3. So NYC Under 3 is very closely aligned with that legislation. That would get us a heck of the way there if they ended up passing that. With any luck, maybe in the first 100 days. I do think that people are newly awakening to how important this is. So maybe we get some federal funding too.
Right. And incidentally, Natalie, I don't know if I could be helpful, but I'm in a Glenwood building too. And if they're giving you a hard time, I'd like to give them a hard time. So, and the last thing is, in terms of that report that you referenced and Tricia referenced, is that one of the links that was already put in the chat?
I'm not sure if it is,
Yes.
but we can have that put in. Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's the most recent thing I put in.
Great. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Great. I have a question, Allison. Since there was a Senate Act, a State Senate Act, an Assembly Act, now, did the governor veto those? Is that the reason they have to be reintroduced? And what were the concerns or the resistance in passing those bills?
Sure. When we introduced it in 2019, we were working to garner co-sponsors and introduce the concept to the governor's team. I think just sort of given the timing and the fact that the governor's Child Care Affordability Task Force was still very much in the early stages of developing their own proposal, the timing wasn't quite right to move on it. And certainly, as Peter rightly underscores, any new tax is going to be difficult to get through the state legislature. With the way that the legislature is shifting to the left, I think we will hopefully be garnering more co-sponsors this session. And we have to keep building the case. I don't think people need to be convinced of the importance, but people need to understand just how important this is to our ability to recover. It's right up there with addressing the healthcare disparities. It's right up there with housing. I would argue, I'm editorializing a bit, but we feel very deeply that this needs to be a top priority. I do know that in his State of the State, the governor this year, or I guess it was just yesterday in the State of the State presentation that he gave, he discussed the importance of childcare and said he would invest some $40 million to reduce co-payments. That's great, right? But that's $40 million spread statewide. We think our proposal just for the infants and toddlers would, as I said, cost $660 million a year when it's fully implemented. So, we got to reckon with the fact that it's going to cost money and be unapologetic about it.
That certainly makes sense. Peggy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to follow up with Shania, if is Shania still here? You were saying that there were 90 active childcare programs on the Upper East Side. I wonder if we could just get a little more information about them. You said 14 were home-based, but could you just detail a little bit more about what these 90 programs are? I mean, there's were some of them facilities, or some, what were they?
So there are 96 center-based programs, which include 17 infant toddler programs. And then there are 14 home-based programs.
And the 14 home-based are for toddlers too?
Yeah, so those are family daycare and group family daycare. So those are birth to 5 programs.
Okay, so the 96 are for young children, toddlers, is that right?
The 96 include, so we offer 2 types of permits. There is infant toddler, which is birth to 2, and preschool, which is 2 to 5. And so the 96 include 17 of them are infant toddler programs. Some programs are have co-located infant toddler and preschool. Some programs are just freestanding preschool programs. We don't have very many freestanding infant toddler programs. Most infant toddler programs also have a preschool as well. So while I don't have that specific information, it is likely that those 17 infant toddler programs have an associated preschool, which are part of the total 96.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Rebecca?
Hi, I'm actually asking a question on behalf of Vanessa Aronson. There's something going on with her internet and she's popping in and out. She wants to know if there are any plans to consider childcare for public meetings, such as community board meetings, city council hearings, etc.
Well, someone would have to apply. At one point, there was a proposal for municipal childcare. I'm not exactly sure because it hasn't come to fruition. So at one point there was a proposal for municipal childcare, but that was more for like city employees. I'm not aware of any childcare for board meetings or those things, but usually that's like corporate childcare, and there are programs that offer corporate childcare, which is like kind of drop-off care, children who aren't enrolled every day, but drop in every now and then. And so you can actually see on Child Care Connect if a program is a corporate drop-in care program. And some of them do have extended out.
I can, sorry, just correct me. Can I just jump in a second? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Councilmember Kalos has a piece of legislation that looks to provide childcare for community board and other public meetings. I don't think it's had a hearing. I don't think it's moving anywhere because I think there's a very huge cost attached. That's one of the reasons. But I think that legislation does exist. The council member from the east side does have that legislation.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm texting Vanessa what you guys said right now.
And thank you, Jessica. Trisha, did you have another question?
I did. So I just wanted to go back to what Shania was saying about the 96 centers. I just want to point out that 96 from an outside perspective looks like a high number, but when you actually look at the report done by the comptroller's office, in total, we're looking at every center, every kind of option available to us, only taking care of at most 20% of the actual need. So 96, I think when you hear that number, you think, oh, wow, that's a lot. Like what does the Upper East Side need anymore? But we're actually only meeting at best 20% of the need. And I would bet my last dollar that has only, the disparities have only grown since the pandemic, because every childcare center I am aware of, at least the vast majority of them, have had to reduce seats or close different sites down. So although I appreciate the number, I think that another big question I have for either Shania or Allison is that out of those centers, what is the average cost in our neighborhood for childcare? If you have done any sort of research on wait lists or that sort of thing, or if Natalie even knows just anecdotally how long folks are waiting to be on this, just again, anecdotally, from our research, and I have an 18-month-old, I found the lowest I found was around $30,000 for childcare. The highest was well over $50,000. I normally estimate that in my neighborhood it costs somewhere between $35,000 and $50,000 for full-time care. Full-time meaning just until 4:45 or something like that. Not if you're doing extended. I think it's important to look at that piece to it. And then I also, to Peter's question, I do think that it would be good to know what our next steps could be in terms of making sure that the Assembly is introducing this bill, and making sure that our Assembly members on it, and making sure that our state senators are on it. And I also, to Natalie's point earlier, I'm curious about if there has been any work or studies done on the impact of daycare and childcare facilities, and how they go through the process of applying for their permits or getting reapplied, or the long waits that they've had to do. And if we've ever actually measured that experience, or if there's ways to be better advocates for our facilities that way too. So sorry, I'm throwing a lot out there, but I guess if this panelist can speak about the cost of childcare, particularly in our neighborhood, if they can, and then if we can talk about how our board can be most effective in weighing in on this issue. My guess is that it's in part advocacy, and it's in part maybe bringing additional focus to the experience of our workers and our families here on the Upper East Side.
So as a regulatory agency, we do not capture tuition. We don't capture the cost of daycare, but there may be some studies, perhaps from another organization that might capture that information.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just add to that this was also a challenge when we were crafting the report, just understanding the cost because of the lack of good data. Really the most precise source of data comes from the state OCFS surveys that they undertake every 2 years, as required by the federal government to set the reimbursement rates. I sort of already talked about how that's a poor measure of costs, but that's essentially what we used. So we didn't look neighborhood by neighborhood. We used the averages per the state's survey. And they survey typically, about 1,000 providers citywide. So it's only a fraction of providers, but still a sizable sample when they determine those rates. Of course, cost range, and certainly there are a number of for-profit centers in the market, in the mix too, that are going to be charging upwards of 30, 40, I've seen $50,000. It sounds enormous, but really when you consider what it costs to provide high quality infant care, that's really what we're aiming for in terms of per child cost. But really the city is spending, somewhere around $10,000. If you look at the mayor's management report. So bridging that gap is really what we need to confront, as a city. And this is where, the controller believes strongly that government needs to step up. We'd like the state and the federal government to join us in this, but, we put forward a proposal that would levy a tax on employers in the city to get us some of the way there.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say very quickly, it's just that I mean, I think that I'm not, absolutely not saying that the cost is not justified. It takes a lot of money and time and professionalism to take care of little ones. I can barely take care of one. I don't know how anybody takes care of more than one. So I completely get that. And I guess my point is just that, like, if parents, I mean, it's just crazy to tell parents that you have to pay basically more than you're paying, at least for us, more than we're paying in rent to take care of your child. And that childcare isn't, by the way, even going to be covering full day. I have to pay an extra $5,000 or $6,000 just to get myself to 6 o'clock. And to Vanessa Aronson's point, if I'm a community board member, or if I'm doing anything after the time of 6 o'clock, then I'm shut out of that completely, just because there are very few facilities that even offer anything later than that. And I'll just say that for our personal, I mean, we're paying, again, I love my childcare facility, but we are paying well into the $30,000 beyond range for our childcare facility, which is just crazy for us. And before the pandemic, I was traveling 4.5 miles to affordable childcare that was way outside of my community, by train, by bus, and then walking half a mile with my infant son to a childcare facility that was affordable for us prior to the pandemic. So it's, I wish that there would be more research done on kind of those experiences and the actual costs in our neighborhood, because I think that when you hear 96 facilities, you think, oh, the Upper East Side, it's full of families, it's probably got full of childcare options, we're totally fine. But the reality is that that's not the case. And I don't think that anybody, especially our government, is paying enough attention to the actual cost and the burden and stress that is put on families. Okay, that's it for me. Sorry, thanks.
I wanted to just quickly address the issue of paperwork and the time that it might take to get paperwork processed. And I believe that some of the delay has to do with the change in the clearance laws. Back on April 1st, legislation was passed to implement the Child Care Development Block Grant of 2014, which we refer to as CCDBG, which requires additional checks for staff, some of which don't happen very, very quickly because we have to kind of depend on other jurisdictions to get those clearances in. And so the childcare community is still really learning how to obtain the correct paperwork and submit it to us. And so that might be a reason why things take a little bit longer, but we have invested a lot of staff and a lot of time into getting things processed. And we're still working with the childcare community to get the information that we need so we can get staff cleared. And again, that was a law that was passed years and years ago, but it had to be implemented back in 2019, which basically meant that all childcare staff had to be re-fingerprinted, re-screened, and checked for every state that they've ever lived in to make sure that they don't have indicated cases against them. And so that process takes some time.
Thanks, Shania. Lakeisha?
Hello. I just wanted to also just speak to Trisha's point about living on the Upper East Side and how hard it is to get affordable childcare. And I too, had to fight, and I could not, when my youngest son was a toddler, I could not find any kind of childcare that was affordable as a single mom trying to have my child in childcare. I would have to pay someone to drop off one child while I took my child to daycare in the Bronx, working in the Bronx, and had him in a home daycare. And it was a nightmare, and to hear that there are so many affordable or so many daycares or, childcares here on the Upper East Side, I could not afford any childcare that's $30,000 or $50,000 as a single person living on the Upper East Side. living in a NYCHA development. So this is not something that, is feasible for me, and this Learning Bridges program that is supposed to help parents, they gave me a slot that's all the way up on 116th Street when there's a program that's right in front of my development. So again, I would have to go out of my home, go out of my way and travel to drop off my children when that doesn't even make sense. And you're taking me out of my neighborhood, out of my comfort zone to put my children in a different environment. So something that's run by the city that again doesn't make sense. So I mean, this doesn't make sense. These things that are supposed to help and make life affordable and easy for a mother who's trying to provide for her family is not working. These things are not, making your home, your life work in this pandemic. It's not. It's more red tape. It's just more stressful. And we really truly have to think about how we're going to help families survive.
Thank you, Lakeisha. Actually, the last item that we were going to put on our program was the update of the Learning Bridges program. And what's interesting is you're correct. There is only one facility on the Upper East Side. It is at Stanley Isaacs. And when I looked through the list of how many Learning Bridges sites there were 448. About 60 of them are in Manhattan. So they're spread among the 5 boroughs. But the Stanley Isaacs facility is the only one that is in the Upper East Side. And interestingly, of all the different sites, there were only 5 or 6 that didn't have any seats available. Almost every other site listed did, which was surprising to me, but Stanley Isaacs had no room. So obviously that's the reason, sadly, that you were given a slot that was so far from the neighborhood. I know that Ben Kalos, Councilmember Kalos, has looked for sites. He's been doing a lot of outreach, but nothing has come to fruition. And I know initially when they launched the program in September, they launched with 30,000 seats. It was the city's hope and the DOE's hope that by December there would be 100,000 seats, but we haven't been able to find any information as far as what the exact number of seats are that are in place right now. Shania, might you know, or how we could find that out?
I'm not exactly sure because the Learning Bridges are run through the DOE. So it might be, yeah, they're wholly run through the DOE.
Okay.
And so it might be good to contact them and see
We've been trying.
Yeah.
We can help with that. We'll try to get you that information.
That would be terrific, Jessica.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Peggy, did you have a question?
I before we get to a resolution and to let everybody know we are planning one, there affordability, as far as I can tell, as well as of course access, but affordability is really impossible in our community. But what we're not talking about here, which tends to be more palatable to legislators, are tax credits instead of a higher tax or an imposed tax. And tax credits is a great way, especially if they're made refundable, so that it doesn't much matter what your income is. You can have a low income or a moderate income, but you get money back from what you're charging for, you're paying out of pocket for the daycare. That seems to me that would have a better chance in Albany. And I'm just wondering if Allison could talk a little bit about the idea of tax credits, either as a replacement for the request for higher taxes or in tandem with the proposal for higher taxes.
That's a great question. Interestingly, New York City was one of the first cities in the country to establish its own municipal level childcare tax credit. It's supposed to, bring down the cost of care, or, take care of childcare, some share of childcare expenses for families with children under 4. What we've seen over the decade or so since that's been in place is that utilization is fairly low. I think one of the reasons why that's the case at the city level, there is quite a low income cap. So that's one piece of it, but also, just given the expense, how expensive childcare is, it's really difficult for most, lower and moderate income families to wait till, April or May for a lump sum refund for expenses that they need to pay out throughout the year. So in some cases weekly, sometimes monthly.
I interrupt. I'm so sorry, but the National Child Tax Credit is for everybody. Everybody can take advantage of it. You can be rich or poor. And I think that's what we need in New York City so that everybody can begin to afford. I mean, it's really unfortunate to say that if if 2 parents are working and they're able to make $60,000, but the cutoff is $57,000 to qualify for a poverty program, that just doesn't work for New York City. I think we need a replica of the federal child tax credit where everybody could get a tax credit, put money back in their pockets for the money they've laid out for childcare. It would be much more politically palatable. And we do it on a national level. Why don't we do it in New York State or New York City so that everybody could participate?
Mm-hmm. So there is, so the federal tax credit and the child care tax credit. So there's a child tax credit and then the child care tax credit. The federal one isn't refundable, but there is a state one that is, which is obviously more beneficial for more families. And then the city one that I was describing is sort of, it was really innovative at the time when it was established, and it's just for families with children under 4. I do think it's an interesting idea to dramatically expand it and direct the investments through that way. One of the reasons we decided not to move forward with that approach is because of this issue around getting the payment at one time when you need the money throughout the year. Although some jurisdictions around the country, with the earned income tax credit, they're playing around with trying to deliver payments in more frequent, smaller increments. So I do think there's more innovation to be had there. But you do lose as a city a lot of control over driving quality if you do it as a tax credit rather than as a funded system where, at the same time you can be funding quality plus creating access through building the infrastructure and addressing affordability. So we really wanted as a city to be able to do all of that at once. And, that was that was the vision behind Early Learn. And I think that is where DOE is heading with their Birth to 5 programs, though, as Jessica said, we've also heard in our office many complaints about the new RFPs. But, I do feel strongly that as a city, we need to be building and having control over all of those pieces. And the funding hits the state ledger and city ledger either way. So I'm partial to the payroll tax, especially given that, employers see a benefit. Employers haven't made too much of a fuss about the state paid family leave law that went into effect, or I guess it's fully implemented as of January 1 of this year. So I'd like to not give up quite yet on getting the payroll tax, but I hear your point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Peggy, since we do want to move forward with the resolution, would you like to take the lead on that?
Sure. Did Tricia have a final comment? Oh, no. Okay. Yes. So what we were thinking of doing was, and we've already sort of thought through the whereases covering the need and the need for affordable care and the dearth of facilities and not enough attention to quality care. And so we thought that we would include all those in the whereas, but in terms of the be it resolved aspect, we felt that we would support the reintroduction of legislation in Albany to create a payroll tax to fund development of daycare centers and assist low to moderate income families in covering their cost of childcare. So the only question I have is that, do we know who might be introducing this reintroducing this legislation?
So it will be Jessica Ramos again in the Senate, and Assemblymember Latrice Walker in the Assembly.
Okay. And do we know when they might be doing this, or we don't know yet?
I don't. I'm waiting on a status update on the Assembly bill. The Senate one has been reintroduced, and they're just waiting on the bill number. So it's not reflected yet. You won't see it on the State Senate website yet, but that should be happening very, very soon.
Okay. Okay. So for members of the Women and Families Committee or any other members of Community Board 8, I would like to propose, or Gail and I would like to propose, that our resolution call for the passage of the proposed payroll tax to fund development of childcare and help support parents in their cost of childcare. Would someone like to formally propose that, or is it or just second what I have just said? Alita?
Second what you said, Peggy.
Thank you. Okay. So all in favor of the proposal? Could you raise your hand?
I think we should, or do you want to just, we want to make sure that we get everybody who's here from CB8. Is there anyone who is in attendance from CB8 and from the Women and Families Committee in opposition to the resolution? If so, would you raise your hand? It looks like there's no opposition. Terrific.
And the names I have, but let me just read them out in case I'm missing somebody. Gail, Tricia, Alita, Peter Patch, Rebecca Dangour, Sandrea Coleman, and Taina Barrero, besides me. Am I missing anybody?
You're missing Vanessa Aronson.
Vanessa.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vanessa. So sorry. Okay.
And Tricia has her hand up. Just, I don't know if you guys saw.
I'm sorry, Tricia.
I just had a question, Peggy, and I know that you're working on the language. Are we talking about, I just want to make sure that the resolution reflects our desire to create more affordability. And so the plan that the proposal that Comptroller Stringer put out suggests that a sliding scale be put in place that caps at a certain income, at an income level, and creates and essentially cuts costs across the board for childcare. So I wanted to make sure that that was a part of the resolution.
So what's in the resolution, Tricia, is what we were saying is that a proposal by the Office of Comptroller Scott Stringer would slash childcare expenses for up to 70,000 families, serve 34,000 more infants and toddlers from birth through age 3, increasing the total to be children to be served annually to 84,000, and accommodating families on a sliding scale with an income of up to 100,000.
That's great. And then do we have anything in there about increasing reimbursement as for providers, city reimbursement for providers, so as to increase the overall wages?
Equity, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there will be something in there. We were just starting to work on that piece.
Great.
Definitely.
Thank
And I think it also includes provisions for construction of new facilities, right?
Right, the capital piece too.
I guess I'm very supportive of all of this, and thank you both for putting this together. I guess the only piece that feels missing to me then is again going back to Natalie's kind of testimony about the experience of being a provider at this time, and what it's like to try to survive against landlords, against with ever increasing and ever changing regulatory hurdles and things like that. I just wonder if there's a way, and I don't know if it's in this resolution or if it's just something that this committee would consider thinking about in the future. But I think that far too often we don't include those providers at the table. So if there's a way that we could either have this discussion later on or do something there, I would love to find out more. I would love to hear a more in-depth presentation over what these providers are going through and how we might be able to better support them. Natalie being a great representative for home-based care, but would also love to hear more from centers and from other groups as well.
I would recommend that. I think that it is important to have a more in-depth discussion and to have someone such as Natalie as a home care provider and have representatives of a few of the centers just to talk about their challenges and to kind of drill down a little bit more. We could certainly have that type of a discussion.
Yeah, I think
I would like to pursue the idea of expanding help to more families. I am concerned that the cutoffs for people qualifying for subsidies for childcare is too low, and especially given the high and rising costs of childcare. So it seems to me that we at some point ought to also consider the issue of tax credits, because this would actually put money back into parents' pockets. And if it followed the pattern of the child care tax credit federally, it would apply to all parents, which I think is only fair at this point, because the incomes in New York City are the costs versus the incomes are way out of balance. The cost being of childcare is way out of balance compared to what people can afford. But moderate income people in New York City earn, in many cases, more than $57,000 just to survive. And the cost of childcare, we've just been talking about the cost of care for one child. For parents that have more than one child, the costs are even higher. And so I really think that we have to revisit what we consider the idea of moderate income to help more people qualify for assistance.
Yeah, I hear you, Peggy, and I'm all for it. And you tell me the date, and I'm there to talk about it. I think that the thing that just struck me about Allison's comments were just that I think that if if I'm a single parent and making $60,000 a year, yes, I would want that tax credit, but I also can't afford to put forward the money, right? Even like I still can't afford $30,000 a year in childcare up front. So as much as I'm supportive of the tax credit piece, I also think that just the upfront costs for parents can't be that big number, because they won't be able to initially pay into it, and wait for that reimbursement. Certainly for us, we, for just as anecdotally, but I can't pay for childcare without my husband and my income combined right now. And certainly, we, although we do participate in the tax credit program, it's not something that we can, I guess I'm just saying that I can understand families who couldn't wait for that credit to come back in and reimburse them. It's an overall cost piece,
Well,
too big of a
my
cost.
final comment would be, but many parents actually negotiate with childcare facilities, not necessarily the cost, although some do, but when the payments might be forthcoming, a payment plan. There's different ways that you could deal with the cost of paying for childcare if you're dealing with a facility.
In some ways, but sometimes, we were told if we didn't want to pay it, then we could leave, because they had a long wait list. I've been told that multiple times, that I've been given a chance, and if not, then there are 10 families behind me who are waiting for their opportunity to pay their full share. Even when daycare centers were closing down, we were told to pay, even though we weren't even putting our child in daycare. And we were afraid that if we didn't pay, even though Teddy wasn't going into daycare, that we would lose our slot. And that was being reinforced to us all the time, that and frankly, the numbers prove it, right? There's only enough childcare facilities for 20% of the need. So I don't think that we parents have a lot of negotiating power when it comes to this stuff. It's something we can talk about later, but certainly we felt extremely disenfranchised and did not feel like we had any negotiation power. I'm married to a prickly lawyer, and he didn't feel like we had any sort of negotiating power when it came to that. Just one person's experience, but I certainly thank you both for taking this on. I think it's just so critically important, and thank you for the panel. It was amazing.
Thank you. And so does anybody else have any further comments, or Gail, did you want to pursue point number 2? And let us thank the panelists also for their.
The panelists were all outstanding, and we're very appreciative that I know a couple of you had time constraints and you stayed with us anyway. So we're particularly pleased, and thank you for that. I don't think we have to say anything else about learning bridges, since I addressed that earlier with Tasha's question. And so now the question is whether or not there is any other old business.
We have one hand up from Natalie.
Natalie?
Sorry, I was writing in the chat, because I find it very interesting, we're thinking about ways to fund this. One of the, brainstorms I had at one point was, maybe there should be, tax breaks for providers, something set up more particularly for providers. So, to Trisha's point, I've always, had some sort of relationship with, either single moms or do-gooders in the neighborhood who aren't, not everybody on the Upper East Side is a banker. So, I've always been able to sort of make it work, between my budget and their budget. But, perhaps if there were more credits for people who are providers to bridge those times between when parents get their income tax return, that could help. Because I know that is something that, a lot of people in my past have done, like they were waiting for their credit or their tax return to come in. And I was able to sort of wait it out with them. So things like that can happen again. And that's something that's a benefit of a small program versus a large program. So you can work with someone and you do have more negotiating power. And, when you're in a program where there's, 12 to 16 spaces for a home, your customers are more like your community. Like I love Lindsay and I love her daughter. And, you know, there are people I see in my neighborhood all the time. I don't just come here to work. This is, you know, I'm bringing people into my home, this is my community. I live here and I work here. I've always been working from home. So, you know, if there are opportunities for providers that can, you know, have like a rent subsidy, for example, so they can make sure that they can stay in their homes during lean times as parents are awaiting their tax refunds. I'm sure there's some creative ways to go about doing it because, you know, one thing I've learned in my brief experience in any of this is there is enough. We just have to be extremely creative and realize that there are a lot of benefits that come with investing in childcare because if more women are working, that raises the tax base. You know, I just don't. I don't see how not investing in childcare can win. So just, you know, those are some of the ideas that I had. So if tax, you know, or some sort of programs are coming in there to subsidize childcare providers, it might alleviate the burdens on parents until, again, a refund can come through.
Interesting point. Thank you so much, Natalie.
You're welcome.
Okay. If there is no other old business or any new business, would somebody like to call for adjournment? We can keep talking.
Becca?
Sure, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your participation. And I think it was an extremely interesting meeting with a lot of very good dialogue and good information. So thank you all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much to all of you and to the panelists.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.